So if we move forward into sort of scoping for sourcing, this is what I mentioned in the objectives. This is a new model or a new framework that Tim and I are thinking about, trying to retrace our steps and see sort of how we held the conversation around sort of planning to source. And what we've come up with is this idea of 3 cubed. And so from a human-centered design or a design thinking lens, right, user experience, we want to look at sort of situation from the perspective of the people who are using or working directly in the new product or the activity or the initiative that's going forward. So when we took a look at this, we said, okay, there's probably 3 who's. There are the candidates themselves that we're hoping to attract. There is the network, the group of people that could help us to make connections to those candidates who we might get leads from. They might help us to share. And then there's the people who will actually be doing the work to make all of this happen. And so we thought about, from a candidate perspective, there's some interesting tools out there from that can be borrowed from other spaces like human-centered design or design thinking, like, for example, empathy mapping. So if you think about what candidates might be interested in, what you'd like them to be sort of thinking about in terms of whether it's the EDI or their expertise or where, the edge of trend of their fields, whatever those things might be, what they're interested in, what they're thinking about or feeling when it comes to the opportunity, that might help you figure out, what kinds of information do we need, or what kind of language might we use to reach those folks. Persona mapping is another one, can help you figure out some like different generalizations for groups of folks who might be attracted to the position. That might help you figure out, both of these exercises might help you figure out where folks might see or look for the posting, how you might craft that, what it might look like. So kind of trying as much as you can to understand who the candidates might be without drawing some of those like really dark, enforced lines or putting them into these big categories, but just starting to think about like, in our organization, it'd be really great to have folks that are thinking about this or paying attention to these kinds of things, or who are, motivated in these kinds of ways to make change or whatever that might be. And then who are those folks, where are they hanging out, and how do we get this information in front of them? From the network perspective, and we'll dig into this a little bit more in the next slide, thinking about who makes up the network that might be interested. And we sort of recommend, can you do a rough sketch of a network map that shows you a little bit about how you might connect this opportunity to those around you. So who makes up the network, by default through social media or other connections, associations, who might need a personalized approach. What kind of collateral or information would you be able to provide to facilitate people in your network actually sharing or reaching out or giving some real thought to people they might know who have those, key anchors that might make them interested or, curious about the position. And then, then again, that question of where do we need to make the posting available? Do we use, which job boards, which socials, which websites, and how is all that there so that we can really maximize how this information gets shared and put out. And Tim, when we were doing the sourcing for Opera Philadelphia, one of the things that we were really paying attention to was the sort of, I don't know if you called it lag time, but the time it took to like actually have the posting and the information about the posting sort of move through the networks. And so when you're thinking about a timeline for the posting, thinking about, if you're going to be asking people to share, they might need some time. It might need some time to show up in different spaces and then have those postings go up or whatever that looks like. So just thinking about, how that information gets shared through.
And that's both the lag time, if you will, from the time you post to when that posting gets to the people that you want to apply, and then the amount of time it takes for that person to apply. Because some great candidates are going to sit on it for 2 weeks. Like they're busy. They need to make time in order to thoughtfully pull together an application package. And so, 2 weeks after you post, it might just be starting to land with the candidates that you want to be interested in. Then there's another 2 weeks that it might take to get those applications in. And so when you build your timeline, it might be useful to think about sort of a soft deadline and then an extended deadline that you actually post to say, it's a priority given to applications received before X date, but this is still extended, and a hard deadline isn't until later. So it just gives you some flexibility so you can see, so you can evaluate what's coming into the funnel. And if you want to extend it, or if you're like, we got 3,000 amazing applications, I think we have enough to get going.
So that third who is the resource requirements. So from a resource requirement perspective, what is the collateral that needs to be generated? And when do we need it for this sort of marketing plan for this position? Are you going to be pulling together videos? Are you going to be doing audio recordings of the posting? Are you going to be creating these media kits? Who is actually going to do that work in your organization? Do you have the support, and how might those folks actually need to be supported to make room in their workload to actually facilitate this if it's an emerging part, that they might not normally take on? This comes up with like marketing teams, if we need them to prepare some of this, the kit, or film editors or post-production folks, those kinds of pieces. If you have capacity in-house, what are they going to deprioritize in order to make this happen? Or what is an actual timeline that actually allows for them to do that? And where does that work live? Where does it get budgeted? Where does that take place? And how is it made available and easily accessible? So this is, you can see already where like sense of urgency and pieces like this really come into play. This is an incredible amount of work and time on the part of all three of these who's to actually make sure that. So when people are like, oh, we'll leave the posting up for 10 days and then we'll shut it down and we'll see who we get, this might be a way to kind of reframe that conversation. So just really curious, has anybody ever taken the time to map their own sort of social professional networks? LinkedIn, Facebook, they do a really good job of this. If you click on somebody, you can see like, oh, you've got this many people in common, or you're a second connection, or even a third connection. And so it's a really useful way of considering. But you can also sort of, with a job in mind, and also I think really specifically with those key anchors in mind, do a quick sketch or a quick scan of your socials just to see where some of those like dormant ties might be, people who might definitely know, but you haven't been connected to them for a while, or who's in the second ring that we might need to, approach. So posting is one thing, sharing a posting is one thing, actually having that person think really intentionally about who they might know, or be open to the reciprocity of actually helping, investing some time and energy into helping you. Those are pieces that connect to this network map. So really interesting to think about, like, how much trust is in this relationship? Do we have reciprocity in this relationship? Do you think they have energy to help you? And how might that ask, or how might those posts sort of differently encourage people?
I would just sort of +1 on the dormant ties, and then the second circle. And this idea of dormant ties being people that you've not connected with from pre-pandemic, but 2 to 5 years. And what's really fascinating about that is that maybe this was a coworker, and so your ties like really overlapped, but over the past 2 to 5 years, you've gotten a different job, you've done different things, and so your circles have started to converge, and they're picking up people in different networks now. But the beauty of a dormant tie is that people know you already. You don't have to reach out to somebody you haven't talked to for 10 years. It's so you can quickly get up to speed, and maybe you have like virtual coffee or whatever it might be, but they're able to connect with different networks. And then the second circle is what I really find to be where the amazing stuff starts to happen. It's like sort of the second circle of your connections, which is where I find most times where really great candidates start to come from. It's not your immediate connections. It's like the connections of other connections. And then, sort of the second circle, maybe third circle out. And so that's one of the other reasons to be mindful of how long it's taking for this to travel through networks, how that lag time again. So we have this, Katrina and I thought, we'll drop this graphic, but there's probably like 3 hours of discussion about this. But so we won't do it today with only 5 minutes left. But this is how we start to think about like the different places and different opportunities we have to connect with our networks, whether it be through things that exist in your own organization, blogs, podcasts, or LinkedIn, how to use the recruiter license, the relational, is this an email one-on-one? Because that's going to connect better with people than just that blanket to 50 people. Hey, if you know of anyone, which usually just goes to, gets filed away. So we'll share a high-res version of this so you can poke around, but these are some of the places where as we start to think about sourcing and network mapping, where we find it really useful to dig into.
Mhm. And just so really quickly, I think that idea of media kits. So we've talked about facilitates the sharing, the opportunity, puts everything in one place. So often it's an email that you can send out that has links or attachment that people can actually physically copy the stock copy and put it in so that they have a message when they're sharing your material over their socials. It uses content to attract interest and engage potential candidates. So this could be quote slides, it could be images, could be a podcast or videos that actually kind of help to animate and put forward a more three-dimensional kind of understanding of what the role is, or things that might be interesting to those candidates. So they use them a lot in sort of like with journalists or with other media, where you get it where they'll send out a complete kit that just really facilitates that. And so we've found that in thinking about it as a marketing initiative, that something like this really helps increase the likelihood that others will take it on and share.
Yeah, just think about it like Instagram or Twitter, like what gets your traction more, like a now hiring or like a quote about this thing that engages in a different way. And so to think about like how you can repurpose in those different ways. I think the one thing that I mentioned this earlier, what oftentimes dictates what we do is how big of funnel we want is how many resources we have, or the limited resources we have in our organization. Because you can make a funnel pretty big using free postings and stuff, but you might get 3,000 people applying, and then you have 2 people on the hiring committee that are like, I'm never going to get through this in a year. So really calibrating the how large the funnel is, and then this idea of application quality, and quality as it relates to the knowledge, skills, and abilities as it's defined. And so really thinking about what resources you use. I'm sure most of you know about these, but if you're going to do virtual podcast editing or applicant tracking systems, these are some of our favorites that we use when we're doing this sort of media kit and also applicant tracking systems.